Welcome to this tutorial. My name is JewelCraft, and in this video I want to walk you through the first steps in Blender. So what is Blender? Blender is a free open source 3D creation suite that supports an entire 3D pipeline from objects modeling to texturing, rigging, animating, rendering, and even video editing. So Blender can be used to create interactive applications, such even web-based ones. Since Blender is a cross-platform software, it can be used on Linux, Mac OS, and the best of all, in my opinion, Windows. So the first thing that you guys will see when you open up Windows is not this window. You will see a splash screen. A splash screen will introduce you to Blender's newest features. It will show you examples of what Blender can do, take you to the documentation, etc., etc. So when you first start your scene, you will see that you will have a nice cube in the middle. You will have a camera, this object over here, and you will have a circle thing that is a lamp if you look over here. This over here is called the outliner. The outliner is a list that shows you every object that is in your scene. This in the middle, this biggest window that we have in this software is called the 3D viewport. The 3D viewport is where everything happens, is where your it's where you tell your story, it's where you make something, it's where you model, you texture, you will see everything happen in real life over here. This is where you play with things. This is where you adjust, you move things, move them up, down, right or left. This over here, what I just touched on, was the manipulator. The manipulator over here is called the 3D manipulator. It's a gizmo that has blue as a z-axis, yellow as a y-axis, and red as the x-axis manipulators in order to move the object in 3D space. You can look over here that your axes are labeled and colored as well, color-coded. So the first thing that we notice in Blender is that we cannot select with the left click mouse button. What we see is that this little crosshair is moving in 3D space. That cursor, indeed, it's called a 3D cursor. The 3D cursor is very important in modeling in Blender because it can act as a placeholder for other features. Such as an example, it can act as a pivot point for an object to rotate or move from. A pivot point it could act as the origin point of an object, but the 3D cursor is used mostly to generate objects at a specific location. So for example, if now I click on add in the bottom left corner is a small menu that allows you to add an object into your scene, such as a primitive mesh, a curve, a surface, a ball, text, and then other stuff that you guys don't need to worry about right now. So mesh is what you're going to aim at first. So you're going to put in a cube. So you see that the cube was generated at the location of the 3D cursor. I can press X to delete my cube. I'm gonna turn on the screencast keys, which is a nice add-on that Blender offers, so that whenever I click on something, you guys can see what keys I'm exactly pressing. So I just selected the camera. So how did I do that? In Blender, you don't select with the left click, but you select using the right click. I know it's pretty weird because other 3D modeling softwares, everyone uses left click to select objects in the scene. This can be changed in the Blender user preferences. In input, select with left. Don't forget to save your user settings. And now you can select with the left mouse button. But if you go back and switch to right, which I guys suggest you do, because right click is the best, as you will become more, you will blend in with the community. This is what the community uses. This is what the professional use. And this causes less bugs in the program. Over to the left over here, we have the toolbar. The toolbar has other different panels that you guys can add and customize in order to satisfy your needs, whatever you're modeling at. So for example, there's the create panel over here, I can create a cube, I can create a circle. The circle was created over here. I can create a torus if I want. Everything is born at the location of the 3D cursor. Oftentimes, you will want to place your objects in the center of your world or in a specific location, so you can change your 3D cursor. But sometimes, as a beginner, you would want to put your object that you are creating in the middle of your scene. So you would go and put this crosshair in the middle, but when you orbit around with the middle mouse button, this is how you orbit around in Blender, with holding the middle mouse and moving your mouse around. You will see that the cursor gets placed relative to your perspective, angle, and view of the grid. So if I put it there, it's not exactly there. See, it's always off. I can change that over here. I can change the location of the 3D cursor. I can say 0, 0, 0, and now it's exactly in the center. One more thing that you guys should know of is that if you want to change three text fields all at once, you can hold with your left click mouse button, and then you can move your mouse down or up depending where you want to go, but don't let go of your left mouse button, and that will select all three of them, and then you can change all three of them at once. Okay, another way to put the cursor at the center would be to press space, which is a nice search menu that Blender has to offer if you forget commands that you want to use often, or a specific command that you cannot find in these menus in Object, Select, Add, and View. So you press space and you say snap cursor to center. Now the cursor is in the center. If you open the search bar, you can see that along with every command over here, there are shortcut keys that you guys can use. So I suggest you learn those shortcut keys and you use them to benefit your workflow and use Blender faster, and you don't have to search around in menus a lot. And so that snap can be done by using Shift S. You will get cursor to selected. So if I select this and I say cursor to selected, my 3D cursor will exactly go to the origin point of that object that I just selected. But if I say cursor to center, center means the center of the X and Y grid. It's the center where X, Y, Z meets. Z is not visible at the moment because if I press N and I go into this tool section over here, and I go down and I go to display and I turn on Z, you can see that the Z is right over there. But it's often disabled as it is unnecessary. One more thing that I want to tell you is that it's a trick that if you are scrolling down to find your options, it can be a little bit sometimes it can be hard depending on the theme you're using, for example, or just your eye cannot even look at it because it is blending in so much with so much text. But if you hold Control and you click on a specific title, you guys can see that they open at once. If I click on this one and I drag my mouse and I hold my left mouse button, you can see that they start to open like that, and I can just hold again by holding Control and I can close them all over again. So you close this tool on the right by using N, and the tool on the left by pressing on T. You can also use these plus symbols in order to take them out, but by using T and N you will be faster. Okay, so at the bottom over here we have a timeline. A timeline is used by animators in order to change the behavior of an object over time by using keyframes, for example. In Blender, we have different type of renders, so rendering engines that Blender uses. So for example, if I put a cube over here, and I know that this is my light source, so I'm gonna bring my light source near the cube, on top of the cube basically. If I orbit around, I will see that it's not even in the center. So what I want to do now is show you how you can align things, how you can look at your view from different views in order to align things properly, be more precise. Because doing things in perspective mode is not always the best choice. Okay, we want to work in orthographic view, which is the view that shows us the orthographic view. If we press 1, we will go to the front orthographic view, where we can change the location of our object by looking at the front. We can press 3 by looking at the right side. So if I bring it in the center, I can hold Control and press 3 again, and it will flip to the other side, in this case the left ortho. I can press 9 to look at the right side. I can press 7 to look at the top. I can press Control 7 to look at the bottom. It's the flip side. Okay, now as you can see, my lamp is pretty much in the center, that it's dead center. Over here, when you start Blender first, you will have Blender Render selected. Blender Render is a render that is no more supported and no more developed by the Blender developers. It was an old render that was used a couple years back, actually a lot of years back, because technology was still behind. There was need for a better rendering engine, and then Cycles Render came, which is the rendering engine, is the most used rendering engine in Blender, because it renders nicely. It gives photorealistic renders. If I changed my shading, viewport shading, from this button over here, it allows me to look at my scene with different shadings. So I can look at my scene being wireframe. Wireframe just shows the lines on an object. It only shows the wires that make up that. It shows the edges that make up that object. Edges and vertices. Okay, if I go into texture, at the moment there is no texture on my cube, but there's white over here. That's because the lamp is because the top face is bouncing off light from the lamp. That's why it is white. Solid is just a basic 3D model, looks like clay, your default shading. If I go into rendered, this will show me a rendered view of my object, which is rendered in real time. If you orbit around, you will see that it's jagged, and then it gets better again. So this is Blender Render. I can press Shift Z to go between rendered and solid viewport shading, which is a cool feature. So you don't have to always go down here and select rendered and solid. We use cycles rendering, which is the latest type of rendering. Talking about rendering, if you guys have an NVIDIA GeForce or a very good graphics card, such as an NVIDIA, like I have a GTX 1050 Ti, I can go into user preferences by clicking on File, User Preferences, or I can use Ctrl-Alt-U, and I go into System, and I go down here and it says Cycles Compute Device. You're gonna have this at none when you first begin. I suggest if you have the CUDA option, you enable the CUDA option, of course, and then you select your GPU. You can select all GPUs that you want. If you have multiples, you save the user settings, don't forget about that. And now you can switch between CPU and GPU in order to render your 3D scene. So if I go into cycles, if I press Shift Z, this is the cycles rendering. We can already see that it is 10 times better than the Blender Render. This is Blender Render, very, very black shadows. This is cycles render, very soft shadows, very realistic kind of shadows. Let's go back. Okay, now let us explore a bit about add-ons. So Blender can be customized by using add-ons, which enable you to put multiple features into Blender that are not shipped with the software, with the proprietary license. So if you open user preference settings and go on to add-ons, you will see that there is a long list of add-ons that can be enabled or disabled within Blender. You can even install custom add-ons from a file. One add-on that I like a lot is this one, JewelCraft. So JewelCraft allows you to, if I click on documentation, I can already go on the internet and I can see that it opens a GitHub page, repository. And here I can look at the README. JewelCraft is a jewelry design toolkit add-on for Blender. It tells you how to install. It even tells you in Russian if you are not able to speak or you don't understand English. You go over here and you enable it from the add-ons section. You save user settings. Now you will have that add-on over here in the toolbar. You will see a panel called JewelCraft for that specific add-on. This add-on is nice because it allows me to create gems without allows me to generate gems without going and modeling them, as you can see over here. One more shortcut key that I use a lot is whenever you're selecting an object or you're going towards it, you are kind of trying to zoom in to the object. You are trying to orbit around, and then you feel like, oh, I cannot even orbit around this. The pivot point is something else. You can press period on your number pad, and that will automatically zoom on the object that you selected. So if I select the gem and press period, I automatically go near the gem, and I can work better if I am near an object. Okay, X to delete. Another thing to show you guys is this over here. This is called the properties panel, and it has different sections. Let me add a cube so you can see there are more sections. So there is one that is called rendering, the rendering menu. Here you can select, you can change the render settings, and then you click on render. If you want to render a still image, you click over here to render an animation. The next one is render layer. So over here there are 20 squares, and each square represents a layer, sort of like Photoshop. This is the scene settings. Over in the scene settings, you are able to change the units that you are working with. So you can choose inches, feet, kilometers, meters, millimeters, etc. In the world, you can change how the world is looking. So if I just click on use nodes and I click on surface background and I choose color and I say I want a green color. So now if I go into Shift Z rendering, I can see that the background is now green. I press Shift Z to go back. I can add ambient occlusion, which is an effect used in video games. And basically if your graphic card supports it. If you have Pro Lightning Skies, which is a Blender add-on made by Blender Guru, you can enable it over here in the world settings, and you can select what kind of environment lighting you want. So these are HDRs, high dynamic range images, 360 panoramic angle images. So I can click on, for example, sunset 16. I go into rendered view, and I can see that now the sunset is my HDR, and the lighting of this HDR is affecting my object. Okay. Then we have the object data. Sorry, just the object menu. Over here, This is the menu of the object. I can show the name of my object. I can turn on display things such as wires, axis, name of that object. I can select on how to draw type. The draw type I can change to solid, I can change to wireframe. So everything else will be solid, while this will be wireframe. This over here has a cube selected. I can select other objects and do the same with them. Object color, I can change the object color from over here. It doesn't affect the object, of course. If I go into render, you can see that it doesn't. But this is a nice way to differentiate your objects within other layers. Over here, I have the constraints, object constraints. It contains features like camera motion and other things. Basically, tracking your camera along with the object. Okay, this wrench is the modifier tab. The modifier is one of the most important aspects of Blender. A modifier is basically, it allows you to modify your object without destroying or altering the mesh data itself. So if I use one of the most used modifier in 3D industry, which is subdivision surface modifier. The subdivision surface modifier is a modifier that subdivides an object. It subdivides an object and create it smoother and smoother. We can see that I can either apply it, I can show it, etc. So a modifier is not applied unless you click on apply. And once you click on apply, you basically, if you press Ctrl Z, you will go back, of course. But if you are working and you got very, very ahead, there might not be enough Ctrl Zs available to you to go back to this. So I always suggest to click on apply when you are sure that that is what you like and that's what you're going with. This is the object data panel. The material panel is this over here. So if I click on new and there's a new material and I click on whatever type of shader I want for my material, I can choose diffuse, which is sort of like plastic, emission and it can simulate, with emission, it will simulate like it is emitting light. There is glass, there is glossy, etc., etc. I can change the color, for example, red. I can select my object. I can go into edit mode and I click on assign. So now if I go into object mode and if I go into texture, go into render, I can see that my object is exactly of that color that I just changed over here. This is the particles menu. You can add particles such as hair and emitter if you are creating something like hair, fur, or just for example, even grass can be created by using particles. Last tab is physics. The physics tab allows you to add physics to an object. You can add collision, cloth, fluid, and smoke simulations. Okay. Let's talk about the node editor to finish this. Another thing to mention in Blender is that you can modify your workspace as much as you want. So you can click over here, go over here in the corners of your windows, and you can drag to have a copy. You can drag downwards, you can drag sideways, etc., etc. And you can change from over here, what type of window is this? This is the 3D view. No, I want this to be the timeline, or I want this to be the node editor. So I can change and play with nodes around here. So I can work on material creations. I can go into user preferences if I want. But yeah, in order to close them, you can right click over here and you click on join area and how you want to join. So right now the bottom part will become bigger by joining on top of the top part, and vice versa. So if I do this, it will join like this. Or I can just hold this, and instead of dragging it to the left, I will drag it above. But in order to do that, I can't do that at the moment because I need to merge these together so they will create one rectangle that can go and overlap with another one. So I can just hold over here and I go left or right. If I go left, this window will become bigger, and if I go like this become on the top will become bigger. It's a bit of a strange way. You will adapt quickly. So you can work on something, and for example an object, you can go into the node editor and you can work on the material of that object right over here, and you can change this to rendered so you can see whatever is happening to your model in real time. This is the node editor. The node editor is a special type of way of connecting and linking different type of nodes in order to create a material, in order to create a noise effect, or in order to create a visual effect as well. I can do add, just like the menu over here, add, but over here it's adding objects, but over here it's adding nodes. So you can click on add an image texture node and substitute the color for the image texture output as the diffuse shader input color, and you can open an image. For example, I choose that. It doesn't work because I cannot find that picture, but this is how you would use an image texture. X, you would delete that. Okay. Shader, I can add a glass shader, for example. In order to put two shaders together, you will need to use a mix shader and connect them. Connect this to the surface and select whatever factor is affecting the other. So maybe you would want a different color. You want to blend between two colors. You want something to be rough than the other, etc. In this index of refraction is how many light, controls how many light ray bounces off the object. It creates more reflections along the surface of the object. We can of course close that, go back to solid. To close this render tutorial, I guys want to show you something called snapping. So if you are snapping something, if you have a snapping enabled, and you can choose what's your snap element. What are you snapping to? Are you incrementing? Incrementing basically means that whatever you are doing, rotating, moving, it will be done in small little increments. But if you don't want those increments, you can hold shift, and that will make a smooth movement or action that you are doing. So if you are rotating, let me go to this view. If you are rotating, you can see that it's a bit jaggy and it's incrementing, but if I hold shift, I can rotate without the increments. I can also click on rotate. I can select the axis that I want to rotate on, for example the Z axis, and I can enter a value. For example, I can just type 45 degrees, so now it is 45 degree rotated on the x-axis. It is better if I show you this with a monkey. So this monkey, I can press Ctrl 1 to add a subdivision surface modifier. This is a shortcut. Instead of going through here, I can just press Ctrl 2, Ctrl 3, and you can see here the subdivisions are apply it just by using a shortcut. I'll apply a 5 subdivision surface modifier, and if I click on R, this time on the x-axis, and I write 35, it is 35 degrees rotated on the x-axis, counterclockwise, of course, because we go counterclockwise when we measure angles. Let's talk about vertex. So for example, if I have not a circle, if I have a cylinder and I have a cube over here, and I want somehow that this cube would get attached to this vertex over here. For example, if I go into edit mode, in edit mode I can work by selecting a specific edge. I can select a specific edge. I can change whatever I'm selecting down here. I can select a vertex or an edge. I can select a face, select this face, and I can move it like that, or something that's called extruding. Will extrude the material out like that. Okay, if you want to access vertex selection, edge selection, or face selection, you can press Control tab, and mesh select mode window will appear. So here you can change to edge or vertex. Going back to the cube, I can move the cube. Turn this on, snapping on, which can be turned on by doing Shift tab. I can pick that and I can snap it to the different vertex of my cylinder. So that point over here is merged with this point. Sometimes in Blender you will have objects upon objects. So for example, if I do Shift A, cube, see that cube is over there with that cube. If I select both of them and I say object, join, now these two are the same object. But if I go into edit mode, I will see that these two vertices are not necessary because they're not doing anything. So I can just press W. If I go into edit mode and I press A to select all vertices, and I click W and I click on remove doubles, that thing can remove doubling vertices. When you're working in edit mode, object mode, select this, edit mode. You can choose to enable proportional editing, which basically allows you to proportionally edit your mesh. And you select the offset over here, fall off, sorry. And you can model. You can make the proportional size circle smaller or bigger, so you will see how much it will affect. If it's bigger, it will affect the entire mesh. If it's smaller, it will only affect other vertices in that space of that circle. So, last tip I guys suggest you is to enable the Pi menu add-on. If I go into Pi and I shut off this, you will see that whenever I'm going to switch between object mode and edit mode, I will have to press tab. See, but I can only switch between two modes if I press tab, either edit or object. If I want to go into vertex paint, I have to click over here. If I want to sculpt, I will have to go over here. If I want to weight paint an object, so I can use physics upon it, and I can rig it. I can make sure that those vertices are the only vertices that are affected by either physics or by the movement of bones. I can weight paint an object. Now, If you enable the pie menu, which is new in Blender 2.8, it will allow you to access all those settings with just holding tab. So if you hold tab, you will have this mode menu, this pie menu, and once you hover over something, for example, hover over edit mode, let go of tab, you will go into edit mode. You can press tab, but then if you press tab, then you would have to click and select. You can also use the numbers, like 6 will be edit mode. Sorry, 4 would be object mode. Or I can just press tab and look at the names of the modes. There's sculpt mode, weight mode, and edit mode. If you notice in the first word letter, it says the letter is underlined. For example, edit mode. If I press E, I go into edit mode. If I press O, I go into object mode. If I press T, I go into texture paint mode. So that's really nice. So if I can press Shift A, I can add a mesh by pressing M because it is underlined, and I can press O to add a cone very quickly. If I want this cone to go at the center, I can either go into the transform, I can change the location. One thing in Blender you guys can do is change 3 settings all at once by holding your left mouse button and dragging down, and now you can affect all these 3 at once. Okay, if I click on 0, my 3D cursor will be at 0. Actually, the center of mass will become will go to the center of the grid, but I don't want that. I want my down face, this face, to be the bottom, to be aligned with the grid. So what I do is I go into edit mode, I control tab, face select. I could also do control tab and press F, select this, snap cursor to selected. Now the cursor is at the bottom. Okay, now I can just do N Z. Nope, I need to go out of edit mode. Shift S, selection to cursor, G, Z, 1, 2. So now it is perfectly aligned with the grid. This ends this tutorial. Thank you.